Good morning and welcome to our monthly Mornings with O'Keefe program. My name is Molly and I'm the Adult Programs Manager here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, and we're really glad that you had some time this morning to join us for our monthly series. I'd like to begin by recognizing the lands of the Pueblo people on which the sites of the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum stand. We recognize and honor their elders, past and present, and celebrate the vitality of their people today and into future generations. I offer this with humility and gratitude in acknowledgement of the need to confront the ongoing injustices of settler colonialism. I'd also like to extend a thank you to our members and donors who are here today, because without support from you, we wouldn't be able to have programs like Mornings with O'Keeffe. So if you are interested in becoming a member and would like to learn about the other benefits that membership brings you, please visit our website at gokm.org/membership to learn more. Throughout this talk, please place your questions in the Q&A box, which can be found at the top or bottom of your screen, depending on your device. We'll try to answer as many as we can at the end of the conversation. For the duration of the lecture, the chat has been disabled. Note that following today's talk, a recording will be made available on the O'Keeffe Museum website in about 2 weeks. Captions in both English and Spanish will be available. It is now my pleasure to introduce our presenter this morning, Bonnie Steward. Bonnie joined the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum in 2023 as Assistant Librarian and Preservation Specialist. She's responsible for supporting staff and public research, maintaining the library catalog, and preserving Georgia O'Keeffe's personal libraries, including assisting in disaster planning. She earned a bachelor's degree in studio art from St. Olaf College and a graduate degree in library and information studies from the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Through her work at the O'Keeffe, Bonnie hopes to contribute to efforts to build risk-resilient communities by preserving and protecting cultural heritage. And today, Bonnie is going to be sharing about a very special project that she's been working on to protect Georgia O'Keeffe's extensive personal libraries. So without any delay, Bonnie, I will pass things over to you, and thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Molly. Thanks for the introduction. As Molly said, I'm Bonnie Steward, the Assistant Librarian and Preservation Specialist here at the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. And I'll be talking with you today about the museum's efforts to preserve and provide access to Georgia O'Keeffe's book collection, which we sometimes refer to as her personal libraries. Some of you listening will already be familiar with O'Keeffe's book collection, possibly even through other talks similar to this one, but some of you might not. So today I'll be giving a brief overview of the collection, covering the type of library materials O'Keeffe collected and how she used them. And then I'll be moving on to share somewhat of a behind the scenes look into a specific project we've been working on to preserve the materials O'Keeffe stored in the book room at her Abiquiú home and studio. Before I go to the next slide, this is a picture taken by Todd Webb, and O'Keeffe is in her sitting room here at her Abiquiú house reading a book. As most of you know, O'Keeffe had 2 homes in northern New Mexico, one at Ghost Ranch and one in Abiquiú. Both homes are an hour or so north of Santa Fe, where the museum is located. During O'Keeffe's lifetime, she kept books at both locations. Today, we have about 850 items from her Ghost Ranch home and about 4,200 items from her Abiquiú home. O'Keeffe, for the most part, did not make a distinction between the books kept at either home. They could move freely between the 2 properties, but we catalog and store these collections separately to reflect the different ways they arrived at the museum and the different ways O'Keeffe had them organized. The Ghost Ranch books were donated to the museum in 2000 by Juan and Anna Marie Hamilton. O'Keeffe did not have a dedicated space for books here, so they were kept in several places around the house, such as this shelf in the bedroom pictured here. The entire Ghost Ranch collection was physically transferred to the library in Santa Fe several years ago, and here in the library, the books are shelved according to a standard library classification scheme. There was no meaningful original order maintained. The Abiquiú books were transferred to the museum in 2006 from the Georgia O'Keeffe Foundation. At the Abiquiú property, which is larger, O'Keeffe had a room dedicated to the storage of books that she called the bookroom. She did keep books in more than one place around the property, just like she did in Ghost Ranch, but by and large, the bookroom served as a central storage location. O'Keeffe had the bookroom arranged loosely by subject, and that order has been documented. The Abiquiú collection is currently in the process of being physically moved to the library in Santa Fe, where it will join the Ghost Ranch collection, and it will be shelved to reflect the original bookroom order. This move is the project I'll be talking a bit more about today, later on. Ultimately, both the Ghost Ranch and Abiquiú books will be stored and displayed permanently in the museum's library and archive in Santa Fe, which is located in the research center just a few blocks from the museum. The library and archive is open to staff daily and open to the public 4 days a week by appointment, and I'll share more information about appointments at the end of the talk. Overall, O'Keeffe's books reflect her diverse interests and life experiences. There are a variety of ways you could describe the materials found on her shelves, and format, genre, subject are a few that I've referenced here. O'Keeffe, of course, had many regular, traditionally bound books on her shelves, but she also kept magazines and other periodicals like National Geographic or the Metropolitan Museum of Art Bulletin. She kept large portfolios with loose leaf reproductions of paintings or woodblock prints that she was likely studying. She kept smaller format materials like pamphlets or pocket-sized books that could be taken along on trips or kept handy for reference. Some books come in their own slipcases or boxes. Others are uniquely shaped like a rolled scroll with illustrations of insects. Still others are made of unique materials like artist books with metal or plastic covers. In terms of genres represented, she had both fiction and nonfiction materials, including novels, poetry, biographies, travelogues, exhibition catalogs, art monographs, cookbooks, compilations of essays or correspondence. Her books are really a reflection of her intellectual life as an artist, but also as a human being with diverse interests who was consistently throughout her life seeking out opportunities to learn and grow and develop new ideas. Looking at the collection as a whole, you can see some subject areas crop up fairly consistently, like gardens, cooking, dogs, Asian culture and philosophy, art. But she also kept books on a host of other subjects like natural sciences, politics and government, philosophy, religion, music, bullfighting, architecture and interior design. The list goes on and on. Part of my current work with the collection involves some item level assessment. So while I'm handling each book one by one, I've been assigning some basic, consistently applied keywords to them that I'm hoping will make them easier to find and make the collection as a whole easier to interpret. I've done this for about 2,000 of the more than 5,000 books so far. So I thought I could share a few of the numbers so far. I've counted more than 1,000 books related to art thus far, more than 300 books on Asia, with China and Japan particularly well represented. I've counted more than 120 books related to gardens and gardening, more than 100 on health and wellness. She also has a number of books in more niche areas, like the 20 books I've counted on horses and 8 on nuclear science. These numbers should be taken with a grain of salt because they'll grow before I'm done. But I think it can be helpful to see real numbers to get a more accurate sense of the scope of the collection. I'm often asked by visitors to the library if we know how or why O'Keeffe's books came to be on her shelves. In some cases, we have an answer, and in others, we don't. We look to evidence inside the books, like inscriptions or booksellers' stickers, but we also look for references to books in things like O'Keeffe's correspondence or other archival materials, and memoirs or articles written by those who spent time with O'Keeffe. O'Keeffe's personal book collection really began after she shipped several boxes of books to New Mexico from New York between 1946 and 48. Her husband, Alfred Stieglitz, passed away in the summer of 1946, and O'Keeffe sorted his and her books as part of settling his estate. In letters around this time, she originally expressed disinterest in saving any books, but she eventually chose to keep some after some gentle encouragement from people like Doris Bree, who was O'Keeffe's agent, and Maria Chabot, who was a friend and manager of aspects of her New Mexico properties. The letter pictured here is written by O'Keeffe in New York to Chabot, who was in New Mexico. It was written in the fall of 1946, so just a few months after Stieglitz's passing. In it, O'Keeffe writes, "I feel ready for no possessions and a cave in the cliff. Maybe in the Abiquiú house, I will only have a bed on the floor." O'Keeffe was likely emotionally drained and overwhelmed with the amount of work she took on in handling Stieglitz's estate. And although she notes that she is sending very little and that she wants less and less, she does write that she has sent some boxes of books via express mail, and she asks Chabot to call for them. She hopes they don't get wet on the trip. This photograph was taken by Ansel Adams in 1944 at one of Alfred Stieglitz's galleries called an American Place. Several of the books on this shelf, starting where the yellow arrow is pointing, can be found in O'Keeffe's collection today, including a few John Marin titles, Movers and Shakers by Mabel Dodge Lujan, and a D.H. Lawrence memoir. It's likely that these were some of the books O'Keeffe boxed and sent in the mid-1940s, making them some of the earliest additions to her personal libraries in New Mexico. Part of the value of O'Keeffe's collection lies in the annotations and inscriptions found in many of the books, aspects that make the books truly original and personal. These notes and signatures often offer insight into the relationships O'Keeffe had with other artists, writers, and intellectuals of the time. Several of the books pictured here are inscribed to Alfred Stieglitz, while the books in O'Keeffe's collection that have personal notes tend to be highlighted because of their research value, their visual interest, their monetary value. Their heightened monetary value. They aren't exactly representative of O'Keeffe's book collection as a whole. There were certainly first editions and rare signed copies on O'Keeffe's shelves, but collecting in this area doesn't appear to have been a priority for O'Keeffe as she continued to grow her collection over time. She expanded her libraries by seeking out, purchasing, accepting books on subjects that were relevant to her personal development. Overall, she used her books, often heavily, as research and reference tools. She didn't attempt to preserve them as investments. So I'm going to move fairly quickly through a few examples of individual items from O'Keeffe's collection that I hope convey a sense of how O'Keeffe truly used her collection and the impact that wear and tear had on her books over time. This is The Voices of Silence by André Malraux, a French philosophical meditation on art that was published in 1953. The book has a blue slipcase on the right in the photo, an intact book jacket lying unfolded in front, and the book itself has been cut in two down the spine. This book was donated to the museum by one of the children of Elliot Porter, who was a photographer and good friend of O'Keeffe's. Presumably, O'Keeffe had loaned or given the book to the Porters. When it arrived back at the museum, it came with the story that O'Keeffe had been reading it in bed, something that she enjoyed doing, and grew frustrated by how heavy it was. Eventually, she took a bread knife and cut the book in half so she could read it in 2 sections that were easier to handle. I think it's a good example of O'Keeffe's practical approach to her libraries and how she valued her books primarily for their content. And from a preservation standpoint, it's an interesting example of a book that poses some challenges to us as we decide how best to safely store or display her collection. This copy of the Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening was given along with instructions for how to use it to Maggie Lopez, who worked for O'Keeffe, caring for the garden and grounds on the Abiquiú property. It's a book designed to be referenced with organic gardening terms arranged alphabetically. The book is quite worn. You can see an attempt to repair it inside the front cover in the image at the upper right-hand corner. And I've included images of several of the items used as page markers found tucked inside the book. These include O'Keeffe's math equations, a sheet of lined paper where she was practicing her signature, and an instruction sheet for cultivating peonies, among other items. This book is an example of O'Keeffe using a book as a tool to accomplish a larger goal, which in this case was a productive garden. The attempted mend reinforces the idea that O'Keeffe favored usefulness over any negative impact a repair might have on aesthetics. This is also an interesting example of how this was truly a living collection and not that long ago. This collection was meaningful not only to O'Keeffe, but to those who worked for her, like Maggie Lopez, who owned this book for a time, and even to those who visited O'Keeffe and read books from her shelves. O'Keeffe had a strong interest in Asian culture and philosophy, and this is evident in her book collection. This is an aerial or top-down view of a table in O'Keeffe's bookroom that I used as a work surface while packing books for relocation. I was taking books off a shelf and beginning to stack them according to size so I could pack them safely. And I took this picture because unintentionally it was an interesting visual representation of the breadth of O'Keeffe's interest in a given subject when she was truly engaged. These books all relate to Japan, and not only are there books on Japanese art, as one might expect, there are books on Japanese gardening, theater, philosophy, health, religion, politics. You can see at least one novel, and there are a couple of books of poetry here. This is just a fraction of the more than 150 books she had on Japan. This book, titled From an Antique Land, Ancient and Modern in the Middle East, was on a suggested reading list provided by Donald L. Ferguson Travel, the travel agency through which O'Keeffe took an around-the-world tour in 1959 that included stops in the Middle East. You can see the travel agency's reading list on the right, open to a page that has this book listed and marked with a pencil marking. That's likely O'Keeffe's. She eventually evidently did purchase this book. On the left, you see her copy with a few travel-related notes in her handwriting. Inside the front cover, she writes the word wait, W-E-I-G-H-T, and then confirm ticket underneath. On the back cover, upside down, she's jotted a couple of numbers that appear to be mileage or distance. I realize these annotations are pretty mundane, but they're another example of how O'Keeffe truly used her books, this time to prepare for and plan for a trip abroad. Again, she isn't precious about this book. The dust jacket is tattered and written on in pen, and the book itself is structurally damaged in multiple ways. Last but not least, this is a New Mexico guidebook that has clearly gotten wet at some point in its history. While I don't know the story as to why it got wet, I included this image of O'Keeffe taken by Todd Webb while She was reading during a trip in Glen Canyon in 1961. This book falls into the category of materials in O'Keeffe's library that we simply don't know much about. I don't have any archival evidence that relates to it specifically, to my knowledge, but it seems possible that this book was dropped in water or left out in the rain on one of O'Keeffe's many outdoor adventures. Again, this book is another preservation challenge and is currently quarantined until we can be certain it isn't affected by mold. So I'm going to switch gears here and talk specifically about O'Keeffe's bookroom in Abiquiú. I've spent the last year and a half working on a project funded by a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to permanently relocate all library materials from the Abiquiú bookroom to the Librarian archive in Santa Fe. I tried with these pictures to give you some sense of where the bookroom is on the property if you haven't seen it before. Basically, if you walk through the Zaguan door from the parking area, the bookroom is the first door on your left before you enter the patio. The museum decided to relocate this collection to protect the materials from environmental damage and to improve their accessibility to staff, researchers, and the public. I think it's important to highlight that the decision to relocate was informed by multiple prior assessments of the bookroom and its contents over the last several years. Some of these assessments have addressed the bookroom itself as a room in an historic structure, and some have addressed the collection's materials stored inside. So the experts involved range from architects to book conservators. For the library and archive, it's been a priority to better understand whether the bookroom is an adequate location for long-term collection storage, and having access to professional opinions has helped immensely with decision-making. I won't talk specifically about any one of these projects today. I just listed a few here, but I know some of this work has already been covered in previous lectures. So maybe you could look those up. So welcome to the interior of the bookroom. This room was originally intended to be a bedroom. It's about 14 by 16 feet with a window overlooking the garden and a fireplace that's out of frame here in one corner. The room is furnished with a large O'Keeffe designed plywood table, a desk under the window, and 4 wooden chairs. It's lit by light from the window and a single hanging bulb. O'Keeffe ultimately used this room as a storage room for books primarily, not as a place for reading. I recently asked Mino Lopez, who cares for the Abiquiú property and who worked for Georgia O'Keeffe. I believe he told me he's been working at the house now for 53 years. But I asked him whether he ever saw O'Keeffe spending a substantial amount of time in the bookroom, and he said he rarely saw her use the room herself. Instead, she usually asked those working for her to go in and get a book for her or put a book away. But he said she absolutely knew exactly what was in her collection. The historic nature of the Abiquiú house means that materials stored in the bookroom are at risk of damage or at least accelerated deterioration for a variety of reasons, including water leaks, light exposure, accumulation of dust and debris, large fluctuations in temperature and humidity, and potential pest infestations. Risks due to natural disasters like fire or flood are also heightened as a result of the property's remote location. I added some yellow arrows to indicate areas that are problematic. I love this room, so I don't want to speak poorly of it in spirit, but it's important to be honest about the challenges it presents for museum staff who are responsible for the materials inside. The arrow on the left is pointing downward towards some plastic sheeting that's covering a shelving unit. The bookroom has, in essence, a dirt floor with tile on it, a dirt ceiling with vigas, and dirt walls. It's all but impossible to prevent dirt and debris from accumulating on the books without covering them completely or cleaning the space unreasonably often. The other arrow is drawing attention to the window, which is usually kept covered to reduce the room's exposure to light. Due to the historic nature of the windows, no UV filtering film or glazing can be used for protection. This view of the room faces toward the entrance. I have a couple of other yellow arrows here. It might be difficult to see, but the arrow at the top of the image is highlighting evidence of water damage around the vigas, which you can find throughout the room. In addition, the room as it stands is overly crowded. This in large part is why the room has never been a regular stop on tours. It's difficult, even for me as one not terribly large person, to move in the room without worrying that you'll knock or brush against something important. Another challenge is keeping this room at a consistent temperature and humidity level. An old propane wall heater from the 1940s is the sole means of controlling the temperature in the room. I don't believe it's used anymore, but even if it is, the books are exposed to pretty large fluctuations in temperature and humidity, which can stress and ultimately damage materials over time. The library and archive in Santa Fe is environmentally controlled, so temperature and humidity are kept relatively stable. Light levels are monitored and UV is accounted for. The reading room is kept clean and free of dust and debris, and it's not cramped or crowded. Overall, it's a significantly safer and more secure environment for an important group of collection materials. Preservation concerns are a large reason for this move, but access is definitely another concern. Since the museum took control of the Abiquiú home, we've been traveling from the house to and from the house and the library when researchers request access to these books. That's an hour trip for a staff member each way, and transporting books in general is not good to do frequently. So for reasons relating to both preservation and access, the decision has ultimately been made to move materials out of the book room and into the library and archive in Santa Fe. And this effort has been a significant part of my job over the last couple of years. The first step involves taking the books off the shelves and packing them in bins for transport. I usually remove the books and arrange them according to size so I can pack them safely. Because they spend such a short amount of time in the bins, we don't worry at this point about using archival quality packing materials. You can see in these images, I'm using a variety of foam, cardboard, tissue, even bubble wrap, some of which are archival quality and some of which aren't. This work involves a lot of lifting and bending and crouching and reaching. Books are heavy. I'm not usually in the habit of photographing myself, but I thought it might be interesting to document what it looked like to have someone working in the space. So I would occasionally set up a tripod and document myself working. We have very few photos overall of people in the book room, so here are a few. Before anyone is concerned that the books are getting out of order, I'll point out that the image on the right, where you can see the numbers 12, 4, 5 printed on a piece of paper sticking out of a book, shows the numbering system we use to keep track of exactly where a book was located in the room. The book room is organized loosely by subject according to O'Keeffe's wishes, and this original order is something we're interested in maintaining and reflecting when the books arrive at their new home in Santa Fe. The first number indicates the section, or essentially the shelving unit the book was situated on. So in this case, section 12. The second number indicates the shelf it was on, and the last number indicates its position on the shelf. The system means that it would, in theory, be completely possible to undo this move and return each item to its original location. The numbering system documents many years and many individuals' efforts to catalog or otherwise organize the book room, but it ultimately reflects the outcome O'Keeffe wanted. The image on the left is a picture of O'Keeffe's own attempt at inventorying her collection. She repurposed a telephone numbers booklet and used it to record titles and authors, eventually adding titles to index cards before abandoning the project. Ultimately, she would hire Carol Merrill to organize the book room. Carol wrote a memoir of her experience for anyone interested, and she has also given a talk about O'Keeffe's books. Her own iteration of an inventory is in the black book pictured here. After the books are transported back to Santa Fe, they're brought to a room that we refer to as dirty storage. These are materials that will ultimately end up in the Librarian archive, but have yet to be monitored for any evidence of pest activity and to be cleaned of dust and debris. I do clean the books. We keep cleaning to a minimum because we don't want to damage the books. There is no scrubbing or scraping involved. I use soft brushes and a fine nozzle vacuum that I often cover with cheesecloth so that I don't accidentally remove a larger piece from a book. You'll see gloves here on the table. You probably noticed that I was not wearing gloves while handling the books in the book room. Overall, gloves are no longer recommended for handling paper-based materials as long as you're using clean, dry hands. The oils on your hands are damaging to books, but the risks involved with wearing gloves that reduce your sensitivity and ultimately lead to mistakes and snags and damage outweigh the risks of oils. What else is here? Just pencils, some measuring tape, earplugs because the vacuum is a little loud. Once the books have been cleaned and checked for evidence of pests, they can move on to the next phase. However, if pest evidence is found, things like casings or what's referred to as frass, which is essentially the droppings of insects. If I find things like that, I treat them with an anoxia treatment, which involves creating an oxygen-free environment that ultimately kills the pests. In general, we monitor our storage spaces for pest activity, and we haven't had significant infestations. You'll see pictured here a bug that unfortunately found itself trapped inside of a book. But this is like, in general, the type of insect activity we see in the book room. We also have years of anecdotal evidence from bringing books back and forth from the book room to the library and archive in Santa Fe on request, and have had no significant infestations of insects over that time. So well, I do monitor things carefully and I do treat items when necessary. It's not a significant concern in the book room. There are other concerns in that space that are more serious at this time. So after the books are clean and confirmed to be pest-free, I move them to a clean storage area where I begin barcoding and documenting condition issues. So the flag that you saw earlier with the location number or call number printed on it, that 1245 number, I print and cut out each of those tags. I attach a barcode to that tag and assign each item that barcode in our cataloging system. All of the books in the collection have been cataloged, not by myself. I credit my predecessor, Tori Dugan, with all of that work. And Molly and I can provide the link to the collection, which you can browse online if you're interested. After I barcode and attach a flag to each book, I note any handling issues or conservation priorities. These graphs here were provided to us after one of the assessments that I mentioned. We had a book conservator come and do an item level assessment of more than 100 books. And we've taken some of her notes and adjusted them to our purposes. So I go through and I make a note of any potential handling dangers. We add this to the cataloging record along with the barcode. We do this so that staff can handle things appropriately and understand without handling the book whether or not it should be accessed by visiting researchers or staff who are interested in looking at it. We also assign a priority number to each book. Some books are severely damaged and likely should not be handled until they have their issues addressed by a conservator. Those books are assigned a level 1 number, and some books look virtually brand new. They're assigned a level 4. So we'll use those numbers to be able to pull reports and track the severity of condition issues as they potentially change down the line. After I complete barcoding and assessing condition issues, the books are permanently shelved in the Librarian archive. You can see sections 1 and part of section 2 there in the image at the upper right. And you would think that the work is done at that point, and it is to some degree, but there's always work to be done in museum collections. We are currently wrestling with decisions regarding housing and storage solutions. I mentioned the variety of formats involved, so we are considering using our display drawers that you can see at the lower left for flat storage of those larger portfolios. You can see some examples of some supports for periodical materials on the lower right, and we'll likely be purchasing some of those. Custom boxes or other enclosures are another option for materials that are particularly damaged or vulnerable. We are always working on digitizing more of this collection. Books take a significant amount of time and effort to digitize, so they often fall to the bottom of the queue, but we do work on that pretty consistently. There are certainly opportunities for interpretation in the Librarian archive, maybe some signs or information that could help people as they browse the shelves. There's an entire archival collection that corresponds to the bookroom. The items that I showed that were tucked inside of the Encyclopedia of Organic Gardening. All of those items are removed from the book and added to an archival collection. That collection is as yet unprocessed, so that's something we'll be working on. And emergency planning, making sure that we have a plan in place for any significant issues that arise or events that occur, natural disasters or leaky pipes, anything like that. So we are working on getting our emergency plan updated. So contact and visit. You are all welcome to get in touch with me if you're interested. You can email library@gokm.org, or you can email me personally. The phone number listed is my own. You're welcome to request an appointment. I have probably close to 3/4 of the Abiquiú bookroom collection in the Librarian archive and on shelves. So you can come make an appointment and browse the shelves yourselves. If you would like to access a particular book, you can make that request in advance and I'll have the book pulled and ready for you. And then I provided the link here to the library collection online where you can browse titles if you're remote. Thank you very much. This is Maya the cat. She is always interested in what I'm doing while I'm working in the book room. I had some technical difficulties this morning, so thank you for bearing with me while I muddled my way through. I'd be happy to answer any questions if anyone has them.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much, Bonnie. This was so fascinating. I've just been like glued to your presentation. And I want to take a moment to just say thank you. Thank you to you and to your predecessors who have helped to protect and preserve O'Keeffe's belongings and her legacy. It's so clear based on your presentation how much specialized skill and knowledge and time is truly required and how all of us benefit at the end from what you're doing behind the scenes. So thank you so much for everything you're doing and for sharing about this project this morning.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Of course, it's our pleasure. So let's turn to some questions here. Let's see. One great question so far. Do we know, I know it's difficult to speculate because we don't know exactly which books O'Keeffe was reading. You know, there's some evidence based on some of the things you shared. But is there any indication of what you might identify from the archives or from your handling of the books, what might be among her favorite books? Or something that's indicated in the archives as something she truly treasured?
Well, I think this comes up often, so it may not be the most interesting response, but I think she really loved the Book of Tea. That was actually out on the table in that kind of working picture of some of her Japanese books. And she discovered that book, I think, in maybe the 40s. I think I just read a letter where she was mentioning it. And she was still reading it very late in life or having it read to her by her companions. So that's one title that comes to mind.
Thank you so much. You also showed some really lovely pictures of some items that were sort of put inside the leaves of the books, maybe as bookmarks or little notes. Is there anything that really stuck out to you as being maybe really special or really unusual that you found inside one of these books?
Well, so Tori Dugan, who I mentioned, who had cataloged all of these books, she has already gone through them and removed the vast majority of those kind of items that are tucked inside. So I hardly come across anything still left inside the books. So that's not really something that I come across a lot, but I still kind of feel a sense of discovery just looking at them myself. The book, what is it called? An antique, it's a book about Iran. And she had some travel notes written on it. Actually, on the inside of that book jacket are some sketches, some little line drawings, and that was kind of fun to notice. Tori, of course, had already cataloged that in the record, but I still have a sense of discovery when I see little things like that.
I can imagine, and I'm sure that many of us here are book lovers, are constantly growing our own book collections. I myself have hundreds of books, and it makes me wonder, like, oh, what have I written, or what have I hidden, or what if someone were to look at my books, what would they think? You know, and as far as O'Keeffe is concerned, so many people are very interested in her long and prolific life as an artist. It's just really special to be able to kind of glean these little tidbits. Let's see. Oh, it looks like we are joined by Carol Merrill. Thank you so much, Carol, for joining us today. Bonnie, for those of you who were listening earlier, mentioned Carol and her memoir about spending time with Georgia O'Keeffe. Carol wonders if you recall seeing a collection of Japanese woodblock prints on the bottom right of the middle shelf. Maybe this can be taken to a little bit more off camera. But she does share that O'Keeffe did enjoy looking at those on rainy days, and some of those shapes can be found in her paintings, in her humble opinion. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about the evidence for other art books and other Japanese woodblock prints in general that you've maybe come across, because we've talked about this a little bit ourselves.
Well, yeah, she truly, her interest in Asia and specifically Japan and China is very much evident in her book collection. So there's a host of materials related to everything under the sun related to China and Japan, also India to a lesser extent. But yeah, she has a lot of beautiful books and some really interesting poetry books. Some of them are illustrated. So, and to my understanding, I think maybe I even learned this from Carol, O'Keeffe liked having Chinese poetry written to her or read to her late in life.
Great. Thank you so much for elaborating on that. We have a question from Laura about whether will the book room in Abiquiú ever be open to our knowledge for tours once all the materials have been removed, or is it still a bit of a special case with its unique issues?
Yeah, well, that's a great question, and it's to be determined. I don't know its purpose yet, and I don't think any of our staff have confirmed whether it will be open for visitors and, you know, reinterpreted somehow, or whether it will be used in another way. Those decisions are ultimately made by people other than me and the library and archive staff. We take care of the materials, but the historic properties team and our interpretive staff will be working on that and probably asking us for our input, but yeah.
That makes complete sense, and it's a good opportunity to also give a shout out to the amazing folks at Abiquiú who take care of the property overall and all of the amazing details and care that goes into preserving the building itself, let alone the objects inside.
Yes, I so enjoy seeing them when I get to go.
We have another question about the types of books O'Keeffe collected. Do you know, or can you talk a little bit about books she had that were about other artists that might have been represented in her collection? Maybe specific catalogs, or maybe some of her colleagues or contemporaries that she might have possessed in there?
Yeah, Well, it's interesting, like my work is interesting because I have very little time with each of these books, and I'm primarily looking at, I do handle physically each and every one. I do give each and every one a flag with a barcode. I look at each one closely, but I'm specifically looking for condition issues more than I'm thinking about in detail about like who the book is about or um, what it's representing. I do note in general the subject, saw that in some of my number counts, but I find that I'm not completely in tune with the details all the time. She had a wide range of interests in art, though, and I think I particularly see that she's interested in the art and culture of different cultures around the world. You see Mexico or India, to some degree, like Greece or the Middle East. So, and Asia, as I mentioned. So I find it interesting that she had art books. She had such a broad range of interest in artistic practices. I don't know if that answered the question really, but that's the best I can do at the moment.
No, that's terrific. Thank you. And I think, again, it's a great opportunity to remind folks what you said in one of your last slides, that now that these books are being relocated to Santa Fe and are being made accessible for researchers, this could be a project for maybe one of you in the audience who's interested in seeing, who's represented in the collection and the nature of the topics. So still, as you said, so much work to be done. And now that's possible because of what you've been working on. So let's see, we do have, related to that question, actually, are the books being tied into any sort of web research resource? Are there ways that people can sort of understand what the book collection is like long distance?
So I'm hoping ultimately that my like subject or genre based keywords will be put to use in that sort of way. I'm not entirely sure how it will play out yet. It will probably be useful first in our library catalog, but maybe eventually in our collections online. At the moment, the entire catalog is like keyword searchable in our library catalog and also in collections online, where if a book has been photographed, you can see photographs of it. Relatively speaking, very few have been photographed so far, but you can visit either of those platforms and browse generally. But I will say it is somewhat challenging at the moment to like move nimbly to narrow your search and really get a sense of like get a quick snapshot of what is in O'Keeffe's collection. But someday.
Thanks so much. You have something to look forward to.
Yes.
We have there's just so many really fantastic questions. So let's see here. We do have a question, a bit of a practical question about folks who maybe want to protect their own book collections. And do you have any suggestions for the best way someone should be storing their own books? What kind of boxes would you recommend or materials? And how would you recommend transporting if you had to move?
Yeah. So if you're storing books long term, and you're using things like boxes or folders, then I would recommend, if possible, seeking out archival or like acid-free materials, boxes, tissue, folders, if that's relevant to your collection. Those can be expensive. So I really think everything is relative, I think the only thing you shouldn't do is nothing. Format matters in terms of how you store things, like whether they should sit upright or whether they should be stored lying flat. Really large volumes should probably be stored flat. Magazines or thin pamphlets often need additional support, otherwise they'll slump and kind of take on that shape permanently. I would recommend paying attention to the temperature of where you're keeping things. Try to avoid storing things in, your attic or your basement where temperature can really fluctuate a lot, or where things might be at risk of like getting wet and potentially molding. So those are a few things that come to mind.
Great advice for those of us who want to protect our books for generations. Let us see. So another question, what other projects are on the horizon, even though this is an ongoing endeavor? Are there any other exciting things that you're working on that you'd like to share a little bit about before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, there are always exciting things going on in the library and archive. I think for the time being, we'll likely be continuing this work in terms of getting things properly housed. Everything is safe and, stored safely in the library and archive once it arrives here, but we can do a few extra things to really make sure these materials are protected. And I still have Ghost Ranch to go through. That was handled prior to my arrival here. And so I'll be applying what we've been doing with the book room to the Ghost Ranch collection. So I think that's next, but it's much smaller than the book room collection. So it should go quickly.
Great. Well, thank you so much. What an amazing task you're involved with, and I can see just from the comments that are appearing in our chat how folks are very interested in the subject. So thank you for your time and your expertise and your skill for being with us today. We really appreciate it. I do like to close these little webinars out with a comment from the chat, and I will include this one from Carol Merrill again, who said, many thanks to your professional preservation of Miss O'Keefe's book room. She definitely wanted them kept together and intact. Good job, and we appreciate your excellent presentation. So that sums it up beautifully, Bonnie. Thank you so much for everything you've done. Before we end today, is there anything else you'd like to share?
No, thank you everyone for attending and being interested in what happens to our cultural heritage.
Thank you again, and to all of you who joined us, thank you so much for taking some time to be with us this morning. And a reminder, please visit our website to learn more about the library and archive, how you can actually visit in person to see some of these materials, so that you can also benefit from all of this work. So thank you all, and we hope to see you at the next Mornings with O'Keefe, which will be the first Wednesday of July. So until then, thanks again. Thank you, Bonnie. Have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.